All right, let's dive right into today's explainer. We're going to be looking at a true masterclass in systems thinking, and it comes from a pretty unlikely source, a World War II maintenance mechanic. His radical approach to fixing airplanes actually ended up saving hundreds of lives. So this is the incredible story of technical Sergeant Robert Orloski and his legendary B-17 bomber, the Milk Wagon. And honestly, it's a story that fundamentally challenges how we think about maintenance, survival, and preventing failure before it even has a chance to begin. Picture this. It's a freezing tarmac at RAF Rattlesden in England. It's 3:45 in the morning, November 2nd, 1944. Technical Sergeant Robert Orloski is lying on his back underneath the number 2 engine of the Milk Wagon. He's got a flashlight clenched in his teeth, a wrench in his hand, and he is doing something that, to anyone watching, looks completely insane. He's literally pulling a certified, perfectly functioning fuel pump out of the plane and replacing it.
Now, you have to remember, spare parts were absolute survival on the front lines. So the burning paradox here is, why does Orlovsky keep tossing perfectly working parts into the scrap bin? Tomorrow, another crew chief is going to find that pump, test it out, see that it works just fine, and absolutely shake his head in fury. Why is he doing this while other planes on the base are grounded, desperate for those exact same parts? Well, to understand what the other guys called Orlovsky's stupid habit, we have to look at the terrifying environment he was working in.
Which brings us to the deadly arithmetic and the stakes in 1944.
11. It's a small number, but it represents a profound tragedy. The average lifespan of a B-17 bomber in the 8th Air Force was just 11 missions before being destroyed. Machines were literally dying faster than the men inside them. You'd bond with a machine, you'd lose it, and then you just had to start all over again. To put that brutal reality into perspective, out of 60 bombers that crossed the Atlantic from Nebraska to England in November of 1943, only 5 survived to see the end of the war. 55 were either destroyed or scrapped. So the question for these crews wasn't if your airplane would be destroyed, it was simply when. And compounding the danger of enemy fire was this massive maintenance crisis. Every single day, up to 2/3 of the fleet couldn't fly due to mechanical failures. With acute shortages of spare parts and manpower, the Army's strict manual dictated a very logical, mathematical rule: you only fixed what was broken or what had mathematically expired based on approved flight hours. Basically, you didn't touch a part that still had certified life left in it.
So how did he beat those odds? Let's look at building the baseline, which was his core method.
Orlovsky's secret system completely ignored the Army manual, and it actually started the very day the Milk Wagon arrived, brand new from Boeing's factory in Seattle. Instead of doing a basic standard acceptance inspection on this new plane, he spent 3 whole days practically dismantling the thing. He wasn't looking for problems, though. He was learning what right looked like. He memorized the specific mechanical heartbeat, like the unique fingerprint of the Milk Wagon at 0 hours. He built a baseline inside his own head, and then he ran the engines and listened to them after every single mission to compare their current sound to that original baseline.
Now, this right here is the absolute game changer. The difference in methodology was profound. The Army's method asked a binary question: is this part still good? It just waited for failure. But Orlovsky, he asked, is this part getting worse? While the Army was checking a part's current, present-day condition, Orlovsky was tracking its rate of change. He was catching the trajectory of failure long before the failure actually happened. You see, he was listening in the dark for whispers of what we call mechanical drift. It's this incredibly subtle process where a part begins its journey toward failure. It might be something like a turbocharger spooling up just a fraction of a second slower, or maybe an oil pump whose pitch dropped just a tiny quarter of a tone. These parts were still perfectly within the Army's limits, but Orlovsky knew they were drifting, and he replaced them immediately. No questions asked. Which leads us to the proof of this method: 129 white bottles. To track their successful missions, the crew painted a small white milk bottle on the nose of the plane. And let me tell you, those bottles were hard-earned. The Milk Wagon flew 7 trips to the incredibly lethal Mercerburg oil plants. Each trip meant 18 continuous minutes of the heaviest flak on Earth. Orlovsky knew that kind of concussive shockwave aged a part exponentially. So he factored in that invisible stress, recalibrated his baseline, and pulled shifting parts days before the manual demanded it. And his dedication was just relentless. Look at this savage timeline during the Battle of the Bulge. The plane was flying daily, while most mechanics had to resort to pure triage, just patching whatever was absolutely critical. Orlovsky worked straight through Christmas and New Year's Eve. He's lying out there under the engines at 4 a.m. while the hangar parties are going on, just to make sure his baseline comparisons never, ever lapsed. The result of all that sleepless rigor is honestly staggering. On any given morning, half the fleet was grounded because of mechanical failures. But the Milk Wagon, over 10 months of brutal combat, it achieved a 0% mechanical abort rate. Every single mission it was scheduled to fly, it flew, and never once had to turn back because of a failing machine.
But this wasn't just about statistics, right? It was about human lives. A plane that simply doesn't fail fundamentally changes how pilots operate. Lieutenant Huber, who flew the Milk Wagon constantly, could climb into that cockpit without that terrifying, nagging doubt that something was quietly dying beneath him. Because of that trust, pilots held their formations tighter, they stayed on bomb runs longer, and most importantly, they brought their crews home safely. They implicitly trusted the machine. So let's talk about the proactive shift and Orloski's ultimate legacy.
As those white bottles on the nose passed 75 and then hit 100, the rest of the flight line started to realize that Orloski's method wasn't just superstition. It was a profound shift in thinking that was actively keeping men alive. But it wasn't exactly easy to replicate. In fact, another crew chief tried to copy Orloski's early replacement habit without putting in the agonizing hours to build that initial baseline. He pulled a slightly worn voltage regulator, feeling really proactive. But 3 missions later, his bomber aborted with a massive hydraulic failure. He'd copied the action, but totally missed the architecture underneath it. You just can't track a part's drift if you don't actually know its unique baseline. Now, of course, there were limits to this system. Compare the Milk Wagon to another legendary bomber, Dead Man's Hand. Both survived well over 100 missions. But on April 19, 1945, Dead Man's Hand was caught by a German Me-262 jet fighter, traveling at 500 miles per hour and was destroyed. The tragic reality is, you can't out-mechanic a jet fighter. War is still a numbers game. But what Orloski did was ensure he removed every single risk he could actually control. I absolutely love this quote because it perfectly captures his legacy. He never gave the war a free shot. The Milk Wagon never flew wounded by its own machinery. It never flew slow and alone as a target just because of a patched system. For 129 missions, he ensured 10 men never flew in a compromised machine. And that incredible feat earned him a highly rare Bronze Star, which was almost unheard of for a maintenance mechanic. 5 months after the war ended, the Milk Wagon was tragically sold for scrap in the Arizona desert, just melted down into aluminum ingots. But its story and Orloski's brilliant method leaves us with a really profound question about how we manage our own lives. We all have systems, right? Our health, our relationships, our careers. So are you just waiting for things to break before you fix them? Or are you tracking the baseline? Ask yourself, what perfectly working parts in your own life are quietly drifting toward failure right now?